First, I would like to thank Parks Canada for providing me as chair of the Endowment Council of the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund the opportunity to address you here today. This is not only a beautiful day, it is truly a historic day. The opening, as you see behind me, of a permanent exhibit by Parks Canada exploring Canada's first national internment operations, a tragic yet little known chapter in our Canadian history. A chapter which began when the first camp opened up in 1914 and ended when the last camp closed in 1920, and its effects have been felt ever since. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est une journée historique. L'ouverture d'une exposition permanente qui a pour but d'accroître la sensibilisation du public à la première campagne nationale d'internement au Canada entre les années 1914 et 1920. Un chapitre tragique et encore peu connu de notre histoire canadienne. We know who was interned. 8,579 so-called enemy aliens. Ukrainians, Croats, Poles, Austrians, Bosnians, Czechs, Hungarians, Lithuanians, Macedonians, Montenegrins, Russians, Serbs, Slovaks, Syrians, Germans, Turks, Romanians, Bulgarians, and Armenians, among others, of which most were Ukrainians and most were civilians. We know where they were interned. 24 sites across Canada, including our 4 national parks in the Rockies, Banff, Jasper, Mount Revelstoke, and Yoho. One of them was right here at the Cavan Basin. Those who learn about Canada's first national internment operations often ask, how come I never heard of this? How could this part of our history be unknown? Children often say, why have we not learned about this in school? And some of the elders in the community ask, why did it take nearly 100 years for this tragedy to be told? Well, ladies and gentlemen, in most cases, humiliation, apprehension, and embarrassment, feelings that were prevalent through the affected ethnic communities. In other cases, abandonment of ethnic identity and the stories and memories that went along with it. The destruction of records of the Office of Internment Operations didn't help either. And based on information that was available, many historians appear to have over-contextualized internment, offered to us things that we do not need or want, and decided not to place more emphasis on the personal experiences, perspectives, and affirmations of those interned, which were documented by the internees and their families, but also by their jailers. Imagine photographs of civilians housed behind high barbed wire fences, images and stories of hard and forced, and some would even say slavery-like labor. Cases of violent administration of physical abuse. You could picture internees fleeing and the number of being killed in attempting to do so. More than 100 detainees dying in work camps across the country during the period. The extent of the pain and immense suffering of not only the internees, but their families and their entire communities. These are raw facts that we cannot downplay or disguise by using historical context. And proposing otherwise does not line up with the actual historical accounts, which have been hidden or are yet uncovered for way too long. Accounts such as those of Mary Manco, who was born in Canada and lived in Montreal with her family. She was rounded up and transported to the Spirit Lake internment camp in Quebec's remote Abitibi region. She was just 6 years old at the time. And her sister, who was just 2 at the time, was buried near the Spirit Lake internment camp. And many other first-hand accounts, including Mary Grbešić, who was born in Spirit Lake and passed away a few years ago. She was the mother of one of our current descendant representatives on the Endowment Council, Mr. Jerry Byrak. Ladies and gentlemen, we are led to believe by all sides that there is only one correct version of Canadian history. However, people approach history with their own perspective and interpret it from that perspective. We need to ensure that we are not misled by those using history in order to further present-day agendas, whatever their agendas may be. History presented only from a particular viewpoint ceases to be history and becomes something else. It is only through debate, discussions, and consulting with one another that we come closer to the truth. And this internment exhibit is exactly that, an attempt to get closer to the truth. Much work remains to be done, as there are many unanswered questions. While our work is still in the early stages, one of the key roles of our Endowment Council over the next 10 years is an obvious one: to foster and fund research and a better understanding of what occurred during that period. Hopefully, once the Endowment Council completes its work, there will be more first-hand accounts and a broader range of well-researched and documented sources, which will lead to less debate and a better understanding of what occurred and more sources for historians to choose from. It's ironic that former MP Inky Mark, a Canadian of Chinese heritage, whose family members paid head tax in Canada, played such an important role in the formation of the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund. And today I commend him for his efforts. I also commend the Ukrainian Canadian community, and in particular, its leaders, for taking the time and making the effort to learn about this historical injustice and for bringing it to the forefront. And I challenge all of the other affected communities, including my own, the Croatian Canadian community, to make use of the opportunity provided to us by the Canadian government for commemorative, educational, and cultural activities, including unearthing the raw material, recalling the internment operations, and the personal stories, experiences, and voices within each of our respective affected communities. And not only to get the research, but to develop interpretations of those raw materials to be shared with all Canadians, so that this tragic episode, while maybe contested, is more accurately reflected in our nation's history. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to having funded the work of the Endowment Council, we acknowledge and thank the Canadian government for its allocation of $3.3 million to Parks Canada to help tell the story of Canada's first national internment operations. And we commend Parks Canada for the location of this exhibit. While images of internment camps, forced laborers, broken families, despair, suffering, and prejudice are not commonly associated with this, Canada's beauty and splendor of Banff, Canada's most historic national park. This tragic story and exhibit do not tarnish Banff. Rather, they provide a different perspective and an understanding of what went into making this park what it is today. I would like to acknowledge the members of the Endowment Council and local community representatives who made time to participate in open consultations with representatives of Park Canada and their historians, and to review and provide recommendations relating to the exhibit text, which was ultimately drafted and revised by Parks Canada and which forms the basis for this internment exhibit. Even though we are here today witnessing the opening of this exhibit, we know that many of our fellow Canadians would rather not give this topic its due attention. We hope the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg will include within its walls a separate exhibit for Canada's first national internment operations, and I call on all the affected communities to be more active on this front. Before closing, I would like to thank Parks Canada for allowing us to come here together at this site as Canadians to remember this painful episode of our nation's history. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you who traveled near and far for making the trek here today, some for the second time in the last few months. In closing, let me ask you to close your eyes and lower your heads as I leave you with these words from Mary Manco, whose words could apply to any of the affected ethnic communities. Canada's Ukrainians were not disloyal. Our imprisonment was wrong. We were Canadians. Those who, like my parents, had come from the Ukraine to Canada came seeking freedom. They were invited here. They worked hard. They contributed to this country with their blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of the latter. What was done to us was wrong. Because no one bothered to remember or learn about the wrong that was done to us, it was done to others again and again. Maybe there's an even greater wrong in that. Thank you.